Transgender Persons Amendment Bill 2026. I am Ushri, your moderator for this conversation. My pronouns are they, she. I'm a queer affirmative mental health practitioner, a writer, a diversity and inclusion trainer, and an associate with Equilibrio Advisory. Yesterday, the Transgender Persons Amendment Bill 2026 was passed in the Rajya Sabha despite widespread community protests. This amended bill brings with it significant changes to how gender identity is recognized, understood, regulated under the Indian law. The bill introduces significant alterations to definitions and certification processes that excludes a big part of the trans community. Transgender is an umbrella term that holds under it various expressions, various experiences, various identities, each of which come with their unique lived experiences and challenges. But by taking away self determination, this bill is excluding these communities from the right to self identify and from the right to safety. Therefore, it raises profound questions about identity, access, dignity, and the lived realities of the trans community. To help us navigate this complex landscape, we have with us two exceptional speakers whose expertise spans law, human rights, and grassroots activism. Please join me in welcoming Professor Shivani Datta. Professor Datta is an assistant professor of law and a distinguished scholar and human rights ally with over a decade of academic and research experience, including doctoral studies at the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, and extensive publications. Professor Datta brings a deep legal understanding to our discussion. I'm
Thank you
really
so
honored that you are here with us.
Thank you so much.
I'm also honored to introduce Koel Ghosh. Koel is a prominent community leader and the managing trustee of Sappho for Equality, one of India's oldest queer and trans collectives. As a queer educator, theatre artist, and gender training expert, diversity and inclusion facilitator, Koel brings invaluable lived experience and a nuanced understanding of the unique challenges and intersections within the LGBTQIA plus community. Welcome to this conversation, Koel.
Thank you for
Thank,
having me.
thank you both for being here with us and enriching our conversation with your insights. Our session today is designed to move beyond mere legal technicalities and understand the real human lives this bill will impact. We will approach the various facets of this bill, beginning with the legal framework. So, my first question is for you, Professor Datta. Could you please take us through the legal history of trans rights in India and briefly revisit what the existing framework in the original act sought to provide to the trans community? What are the core legal ramifications of the amended bill, especially regarding the changes in definitions and certification processes?
Yeah, first of all, we are here today because, as you have said, that it has been passed, amidst lot of criticism over the bill. So, when we talk about a legal framework, first of all, we need to understand that we need a framework to protect, to feel secured. When you're talking about a group of people or when you are making a law, the first thing what needs to be done is that whether we are fulfilling or whether it is giving a platform to them, or whether you're taking out the rights which they did not have until the Supreme Court decision in 2014. So when we look why Nalsa versus Union of India is celebrated is for the reason that it is for the first time that it is identified as a third gender. And as per the Constitution of India, when you talk about Article 14, 15, 19, and 21, it was identified. So there was an identity which was given considering the self-perceived identity and not something which is imposed on them. It is like on only on a basis of an application. It was like the law was protecting them. How and the Nalsa judgment was, you can say that the Act of 2019 was based on mostly on the Nalsa judgment, even though there were slight challenges or limitations, but yet most of the provisions catered to the needs of the groups. However, and the three things which were considered was self-perceived identity. If you look into the process, it was more simplified process, and it was anti-discrimination, which barred discrimination on the basis of education, health, and employment. This is something which the 2019 Act was already there. So when you already have an act, the next step when you do an amendment is to see whether you have any loopholes in the act, and you try to fix it, right? However, when a definition is comprehensive or when it is more appropriate, the 2026 Act seems to take away certain, groups from the particular definition which was there in 2019. So if you look into the current definition, and where most of the people have objected to the definition being very, inclusive and excluding certain category of people, is that it is more on biological and socio-cultural definition rather than self identity. So it has basically narrowed down the definition, which is something of a concern, where most of the people will be excluded from the protection of the act. First that, and second is the medical gatekeeping, which you can see. It is mostly that previously it was an application which was needs to be given to the DM, and thereby a certificate used to be issued. But now it has to be through a supervisory, and it has to be verified before basically considering whether to give the protection or not. So this is something which the present act is there, where there is a risk that and the the privacy, the question is on privacy. Isn't it a violation of right to privacy when you have to ask somebody to identify yourself? That is where probably the first two things, that is the definition and the medical gatekeeping, is something which is of a more concern.
Thank you. I am reflecting on what you are saying, that
Hmm.
laws are meant to act as a safeguard for security and bringing in, a sense of well-being. But what this act is doing, the amended bill is doing, is creating medical gatekeeping, right?
Yeah, it's like
In
inclusiveness should be the criteria of a law, that you feel protected, or if you are making a law for a specific community or a group, that they should feel secure and they should feel protected. Protected in the sense that the rights are protected and also the rights are recognized as per the constitution. But if you are trying to remove certain, people from by amending a definition which was comprehensive in nature in the 2019 Act, this shows that you have a different intention of exclusion.
Yes. And in this aspect, I would like to bring you in, Koel, from the perspective of lived experience. I have a two-pronged question for you about these changes, this medical gatekeeping we are talking about. First of all, why Professor Datta was talking about self-determination. Could you give us an understanding about the various distinct identities, the differences, and why do they matter? The trans, intersex, gender diverse identities and their distinctions. And also, given the bill's introduction of a medical board for identity recognition, what does this validation process mean from a lived experience?
So, we work with transmasculine persons and gender diverse non binary people assigned female at birth. The definition does not even have any mention of these identities, which means that there is direct invisibilization and erasure of anybody who identifies as a transmasculine person, as a non binary person, as a gender diverse person. It is only focused on the Hijra Gharanas of Aravani Jogappa and things like that, other other identities which are absolutely related to the profession of Hijra, the Hijra profession. Only they are considered as the authentic trans persons. This means that anybody who is no longer so, and we do not know if the law is retrospective in nature. We have no idea whether the law is going to be retrospective in nature. So, from 2019 to 2026, around 32,000 trans cards have been made. Now, this 32,000 trans cards, transgender person's card, what happens to them? Do they become invalid? Do they do not have any more identity? Then the second thing is there will be a great challenge with medicalization and medical surveillance that is happening. The dignity of a trans person is constantly put into question, which means that anybody who identifies as a trans person now has to go in front of a medical board and a district magistrate to prove that they are transgenders, and only then will they be able to access the entitlements of the state. That is extremely that is extremely that is extremely problematic. The third thing is the resources, access to resources like GD certificates, hormones. People need gender affirming care because gender affirming care is not a privilege, it is a necessity. Now doctors will be afraid because there is a point that anybody who become a trans person will now be criminalized for 5 to 15 years, which is a huge thing. So for example, if a psychiatrist is giving gender dysphoria certificate, they can be criminalized. If a endocrinologist is giving you hormone supplements, they can be criminalized. If you are for going for a gender affirming surgery, then the doctor who's doing the surgery, they can be criminalized. Social workers, there is a lot of natal family violence that we see, right? So a lot of trans people are forced to leave home which are extremely violent, where they cannot stay anymore. Now in such situations, if these people do not if we want to go and rescue people from their natal family homes, their parents can say that you are forcing my child to become trans, and hence CBOs and NGOs leaders can be penalized, can be criminalized, and we will be behind bars. So this can really take away all kinds of support system that a trans person was dependent on. So this is going to cause extreme panic, agony within the trans community, which who are absolutely at the brink of not knowing what to do next. There is a complete breakdown. There is a lot of loss of hope. There is this all pervasive sense of futility. A lot of people have become suicidal. A lot of people are feeling extremely afraid. They are afraid that they have to detransition. A lot of people are saying, then I am on hormone for 2 years now, if I don't get hormones, my entire body and my entire health will be affected. What do I do now? So one law can really cause so much of pain and so much of uh, insecurity within the entire transmasculine non-binary community. So I think this law is detrimental, it is draconian, and it is going to affect and adversely affect the transmasculine community, the non-binary community, the gender diverse community. That's all that I wanted to say. This is the ground reality. People are panicked, people are worried, people are scared, people are afraid that they will lose out on jobs because they had gotten the jobs through the trans quota. Now they can lose jobs.
I think there is some network issue on Coel's
Uh,
end.
I'll just pick up from where she is, like,
Yeah.
exactly what I would also, like, say that, a law, when you have made it, you are not, like, filling into the loopholes, but in fact, you are trying to exclude them, what, like, rights have been given to them. You're just taking away the rights, keeping it as, like, in no man's land. So, as she has pointed out correctly, the penalization is a concern. The penalization is a concern because nobody would, anybody could be behind the bars on the pretext that they are, they have used certain terminology or legal terminology, if you are kind of you are trying to push them or trying to be into a particular group, so they will be penalized into the, for a maximum 5 to 15 is a huge years. So the help or the, aid which I have been receiving, that would be stopped. So that is a real cause of concern. And they have used that arbitrary or undue influence or coercion, two terms they have used: undue influence and coercion. So when we say undue influence, we use the term undue influence when one is in a better position than the other. And coercion is like when there is a threat of life, and the other person has to be into a particular group. So these two are very strong terminology which have been used in the legislation, which is a cause of concern, for which the aid may be stopped, or the people who are helping or aiding may hesitate, or they are at the potential risk that they will also come within the criminal law back framework. That
I
is
am
one.
I am wondering from listening to both of you. I am feeling this sense of utter, anxiety on behalf of the community, where the law that is supposed to help can penalize you for wanting to access the support that you need to
Yeah, exactly.
move around as a human being. I would like to bring you in, Professor Datta, about how these the amendments can go against the constitutional. Do they go against the constitutional rights of the trans community as individuals, citizens of this country?
Huh.
Could you
So see,
elaborate on that?
so if we say whether it violates the constitution, see, it violates the Supreme Court decision of Nalsa, first of all. So Supreme Court decision uphold the, dignity part of the, the judgment was celebrated that human dignity, it's not mere living as a human being, but a human being needs to live with dignity. And that dignity was given under the Nalsa case, and considering Article 14 or 15 of the Constitution. But here, yes, before I answer your question, I would also like to say that the law, what has done is two things. One is the exclusion part, second is the aid part is also tried to be, stopped. Somebody who is helping as part of NGO or any such, they also have a threat now. So it's a two-way process. It's not only that you are excluding a group, but you are also trying to put a halt on the people who are supporting them, who are giving a platform to live a life with dignity. So that is a major concern. Secondly, whether this law is violative of the constitution or not is, you cannot we cannot say that it directly violates the constitution because they have formed a group. But what we can say is that the law which is made in 2026 do not cater to the needs of the community. Rather, you are going it backwards. 2019 at least recognize them. You are trying to de-recognize them. That is something which is a concern. So we have to look into perspective, and as she has said that whether it is prospective or retrospective in nature, usually a law is prospective in nature. However, if the law is specifically made retrospective, then yes, during this duration, whatever rights was given to them would be taken away. So that clarity also needs to be there. But usually, in when a law is passed, it will usually be prospective because of many other reasons.
Thank you for your insights, Professor. I would like to bring you in, Koel, from you alluded to earlier also how difficult it is for the community. I would like for you to break down the realities of trans and gender diverse communities who were already going through a lot of challenges even before the law was amended. If you could break down further, Koel, what natal family violence can look like, and therefore what is the need for chosen families, and how this law, this bill is also going to affect that. If you could bring that perspective in, Koel.
Hello,
Koel,
is
can
this
you
a...
hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Tell me the question, please.
Yeah, so like we were discussing, uh, how this law is beginning to look very very regressive. I wanted you to break down for the allies who are joining this conversation about the realities of gender diverse and trans persons in India, living in India, especially from the natal family violence perspective, what it looks like, and the need for chosen families. If you can bring in experiences you have had from working as as a
Yeah,
community leader,
yeah.
and how this law is
Yeah.
also trying to is going to affect that the need to access chosen family.
Right. So a lot of people have to leave home because of violent natal family homes, right? And they leave home because they are forcefully married off, or they are undergone, or they are forced to undergo conversion therapy, or they are institutionalized in rehabilitation centers, or they are given not given food. The kind of violence that we have witnessed within in this 7 8 years of the trans bill coming in is excruciating. It is unbelievable. And at that time there is no other option but to leave home. We have seen documents, ID documents, ID cards of trans people being burned down by their family members. We have seen all sorts of resources taken away from them. So when we have intervened and we have tried to get people out of such violent natal family houses, now with the new law, the families can easily say that we are trying to get their ward or their children uh, to become trans, and they can actually put a case against NGOs or CBOs, whoever is trying to help a trans person leave an abusive home. So natal family violence will increase. We have already gotten within from yesterday to today, I've got 3 or 4 calls of people who are saying that their families have seen the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha bill, because it's always everywhere, and they are also saying that this can lead to extreme forms of violation. And their families have already threatened them that now we are going to do what we want to do, because the government is also with us. This is what the state is saying. So now they have gotten more courage, more audacity to do what they want to do without any consequences. So Ushri, that is going to really really impact a lot of people. We don't know what we are going to do. We are very much scared and afraid. We are feeling extremely vulnerable at this juncture. So yeah, these are some of the challenges that are happening.
Thank you, Koel, for bringing the spotlight to those experiences, those very real lived experiences. Listening to both of you, I am wondering why where there's this deep disconnect between what the law is and what the community experiences, right?
The
So
only
Exactly.
reason
I
behind this is there is no consultation. Ustri, there has been no consultation with the community folks. If there was consultation done, then this law would have not been passed. There has been no conversation with the community folks who are actual stakeholders. A budget is being decided. When the NCTP members are trying to put in their points, saying that, oh no, what is happening, we do not subscribe to it, they are being told, they are not being consulted. They are only appointed members of the council, but they are not being consulted before such horrendous act, bill becomes an act. There is no public consultation. There is no consultation with communities. There is no consultation with NGOs and CBOs. If there is no consultation and you are making a law thinking about whatever the hell that you want to think about, then this is going to happen. This is bound to happen, and it is happening.
With respect to the consultation or pre-consultation, which usually has to be taken when it comes to a group of people where a law is made. So in India, it's not only the first time. There are most of the laws which are not taken. The consultation are just taken for basically a tokenistic option. It's not really the lived experiences which are taken into while framing a law. It's not only this is the only legislation, but there are several other legislations where there are which we you have you said that it's a draconian. And when I am talking from a very legislative point of view, what the law is, you are talking what the reality is. So there, I think there is a huge gap in between these two, and the legislature usually they try to fix the gap, but this law has tried to widen the gap. And somewhere, it's as I said, it's in a no man's land. So not you are not being recognize itself in the in reality. That is something which is of concern. And secondly, as you we focus on the identity part, access to right will only be there when you undergo the medical examination which is there in the law. Otherwise the access to right is also not provided. So there is no other option that a person has to you have to get it verified by a medical examination board, and then you get the rights which are provided under the legislation. Otherwise, as it says, it's excluded, completely excluded with no rights. And as you said that the family problems would be more. That is something which is a concern which has to be taken it seriously. And whether consultation is done or not, when a law is made, certain things has to be kept in mind, whether it is going to fill into the loophole or not. That is what is a major concern.
Yes, and while I'm listening to both of you, I'm reflecting that in this void where the law is not being able to support the first of all, there's maybe not awareness in the people who are making these laws, and therefore it's not being able to support the community. uh, Koil, I want to shift the focus a little bit to institutions, especially workplaces. What do you think are the kind of things that institutions, organizations can do as allies to support their trans employees while this challenging times are, unfolding?
I think one very important thing that they should not do is at any point of time they should not, create further barriers or create any hostile environment for trans employees, not to make them feel that they are at risk, not to make them feel that they are at risk at any point of time. They should not feel that there is any kind of way that their jobs could be taken. They should be very very empathetic, not to ask, oh okay, then do you have a trans card? Oh, how much of your surgery has been done? Oh, now with the new bill, will you then detransition into becoming a woman? Because these are some of the questions that people have been facing. These are some of the questions that people have been having to hear. So it is extremely important that because a trans person is anyway feeling extremely vulnerable at this juncture, not to add to that at any juncture. Please don't add to our own already very burdened lives. you know be sympathetic, be empathetic, try and have not have conversations around the trans bill, because honestly nobody has the answer right now. It will take some time for the tide to pass over, for people to clearly give you correct concrete answers. So one has to be very sensitive, and in no way should a trans person feel that their livelihood is also at stake, because if that happens, then there is going to be absolute mental breakdown, and we are very very scared about that.
Thank you, Koil, for
um
please.
Just wanted to say that when it comes to livelihood, it is a fundamental right which is protected, and it cannot be taken away or when it comes that asking certain sensitive questions, it also confidentiality or that is privacy, which we have to be mindful of, and the people around us also should consider. And one thing which I feel is like, it is not only about a community as such, it's for all of us. We don't know what the generations will like, right? So we have to be mindful, and we have to support a particular law, whether it is actually like ultra virus the constitution, or whether it is adhering to the constitution. Our concern should not be individualistic, but it should be on a broader perspective. We should not think from a single perspective whether it will impact a particular individual or not. And when it comes to employer employee relation, the same rule which is applies to all employees, that should also like apply to trans people. That is what my concern. And taking a job retrospectively would be something which is humility, as well as it will definitely impact on the mental health of any person. So what I feel is like, it has to we need to think on a broader perspective. And but I also feel that we need to talk. If we stop talking, or if we stop discussing, then it would be difficult that this law is taken aback. That is something which I feel. So talking, discussing, and coming with concrete points, and approaching the apex court of the country is something which we have. That is something which we should not stop it here. We should always think that we have to bring this down, so that everybody is is getting their rights which the constitution provides.
Thank you for that insight, and yes, for underlining that if the right to work, which is a fundamental right, is removed, then there's this final feeling of desolation, that the deep mental health impact that comes with that. I also want to see, understand, Professor Datta, given this current climate where the bill has been passed, and like Koil was underlining, there's this deep sense of alienation and panic in the community, that what next after this, right? So, from that perspective, what legal resources at this point the community can access? What are the places of support that the community can access at this point? If
So,
you would please throw some
yeah.
light on
So,
that.
it's like, first of all, yes, definitely when the law is brought up abruptly and in a haste. So, there is a environment where everybody is panicking or opposing it. Somebody have left the parliament, or somebody have opposed it. The reason is very simple, that they do not want to accept this. They do not want something which is against their dignity. We have to keep in mind that there are certain decisions of the Supreme Court, like in Puttaswamy case and so on, where there is a privacy which has been protected. However, if you look into here now, where is the legal right, or what is the legal remedy here? So if you talk about the legal remedy, we have in some of the states, like in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, they have welfare boards. So like the welfare boards probably can give local protection that like will help them. Secondly, legal aid organizations like NALSA, we have the state district legal service authority also. They can take in the issues, and probably they can approach on the behalf. This is somewhere which this is a limited scope. And also fundamental rights, right to privacy under article 21, where basically a writ can be filed. So a writ can be filed in the Supreme Court considering this. And this is something which the windows are still open, and where as we say, that we have to draft it properly and thereby approach the court.
Thank you for that very insightful answer, for sort of directing us to what are the places of aid that we can still look to. I would at this point want to bring in a question which I think is important at this point. One of our listeners is asking. Uh, uh, to you, Professor Datta, ki in your view, do you think the Supreme Court will hold the act unconstitutional?
So,
And
see whether
huh,
see, first of all, whether the decision of the Supreme Court, we can only speculate. So, see, the law which is made is completely against the decision of 2014, Nalsa case. So, there is a scope that, when you look into Article 14 or Article specifically Article 21, when you talk about right to privacy, as of now, when you talk about the medical examination part, there is a probability that and possibility that this provision will be struck down in considering that it violates the right to privacy, where you have to basically verify yourself and then get an access to legal rights. So there is a probability, or I feel that it would be struck down considering that it is unconstitutional.
thank you for answering that. I also want to bring you in, Koel. I'm also thinking about the larger scenario, what has been happening on the global stage for some time now when it comes to trans rights, right? And I'm thinking, how does it at all, whatever is happening on the global stage, does it at all have an impact, according to you, on what is happening in our country right now? And then what is the way forward? Why is it important to create visibility, trans representation, and so on and so forth?
It is very interesting because India was one of the only few countries like Malta, Philippines. There were some of these countries which actually acknowledge self identification as a fundamental right. Now, with the global entire politics around gender changing and trans rights becoming shrinking and becoming more and more, hormone blockers are being banned. Different kinds of trans persons in UK, in US are facing a lot of wrath for their identities. We are very worried because that is now also come in and has implemented itself in India. So we do see that there is a lot of influence from the outside which has really made this change, because if you see the countries we are at pact with, those are the countries which have anti or regressive trans laws, and those are the laws that are now being implemented in India. India was one of the more very few countries which had self determination. Now that is also being changed. So we do see a lot of political influence from the outside on India, and I strongly feel that that is one of the reasons why the bill has been passed with such urgency. When we see a global war, and when the prices of different kinds of LPG gases is increasing, there is dearth of cylinders, there is such a global crisis happening. What was the urgency to immediately pass it one day in Lok Sabha and the next day in Rajya Sabha? Three hours of time was allocated. There are several things that need immediate attention, but those were ignored. What was focused on was the trans bill. So maybe this is also an opportunity to understand where this is coming from and why is there such an urgency to suddenly. So when 2016 also a very regressive bill had come in, but at that point of time Shivani ma'am will also agree that it was sent to a standing committee. Then, after 3 years, in 2019, the bill was formed. The bill turned into an act in 2020. So, 4 years, 6 months of consultation with community experts were done when it was sent to a standing committee. After 4 years, we finally saw an act coming into place. Not that the act was very progressive, but all the problems of the bill was removed in the act. there also it was written that one has to go in front of a district magistrate and has to go in front of a medical board to prove their authenticity as a trans person. But when you see the act, that had completely been erased. Here, when the petition was made that let's just put this into a standing committee, you do not even have to withdraw the bill, put it in front of a standing committee, get the standing committee. Our lordship Asha Menon and seven other departments, they had said that no, this, please reconsider, but that was also not binding to the parliament. So it's all very strategic how it is happening, and the urgency with which it is happening, and at a context, at a political context at which it is happening. So we definitely feel that there is of course a lot of global pressure on India to do this, because this is not safeguarding laws. This is not safeguarding the marginalized of the marginalized. This is exclusion. And this act, this bill is completely exclusionary in nature, and it's so exclusionary that it is driving the community which it aims to serve or help. The same community is feeling the angst already. There are people, we are getting stories, and we are getting information about people being heckled and harassed at home. We are getting stories and incidents where people are being asked offensive questions in their educational institutions, in their workspaces. So the intention of this act, if the intention was meant to protect, it has not done its part. If you look at the budget also, I will tell you, this is very interesting that you asked me this question. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Hello?
can. We can hear you, Koil. Uh, I think there's a technical issue on Koil's side.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I wanted to share and show you something. Just give me
Yeah.
a moment. I'll show you. From 2021 to 2022, 20 crore rupees.
Koil, I think we are losing you again.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can now.
Yes. Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So in 2020, sorry, in 2025,
I think some network issue is persisting on Koil's side. In the meantime, we would come back to what Koil was saying.
I think.
In the meantime, I want to take a question from an audience member. I think Dr. Professor Datta, you can come in with this. Can you
Yeah.
talk a bit about what accesses does having a certificate of identity facilitate? Uh, the person further writes, I'm asking in context of this certification being made more inaccessible now and want to understand the ramifications of this.
Hmm. See, the law, how it is drafted, is like, you need to have a certificate and then only you will have the schemes. So, for example, if a scheme is there, you have to show the identity and which has to be verified by the medical board, then only you will have an access. Supposedly, you do not wish, or you say that you do not wish to undergo the medical examination, or you self identify yourself to be a particular gender, then in that scenario you will not have any rights under this bill. So which makes it something which is like compulsory, that you need to have a car, identity or a certificate, and then only you get the welfare measures which has been provided under this, in terms of education or in terms of health sector. Say, as you are saying that in many of the people drop out because of bullying, and this Nalsa judgment, when it was given, this was a kind of a protection which was given, that so that they feel secured and there is no discrimination on the basis of that. However, now if this law is like as it is passed, so there will be more cases with respect to discrimination, as more cases with respect to sensitive questions being asked or private questions being asked. And as you say that you have to everything is based on the certificate which is needs to be issued. There is no other way to get access to the benefits or the welfare measures without undergoing that. That is something which has to be done if the benefit of the law has to be taken.
Thank you for bringing in that insight. I am also looking at one more question that has come in from one of our team members. If we proudly say that we are all equal and support equality, then why someone has to prove their gender identity? Isn't it a violation of Articles 15 and 21? Would you like to take that, Professor?
Before going into Article 15, which talks about a law should not be made on the basis of discrimination on the basis of gender, I will also talk about Article 14. Article 14 basically provides us equality or equal protection under the law, but at the same time, Article 14 also provides that there needs to be reasonable classification. So when you talk about the classification which is made in the 2026 Act, so there is something which is a concern. The classification is doesn't seem to be reasonable enough. So this is where we can look into whether it is violates Article 14 of equality or not. Secondly, yes, rightly pointed out, there should not be a law based on the particular. It should not be a law should not be made based on discriminating a particular gender, considering third gender as identified by the Supreme Court. However, if you look into here, it is for the marginalized people, but how the definition has been altered is a concern. So if there seems to be no reason for why exclusion has been done, so definitely Article 14 and 15 both are hit by the provisions of this legislation.
Thank you for providing that insightful answer. Koil, if we can bring you in, and
Yeah.
if you could, one of the questions that has come can beautifully segue us back to what you were saying. This person, Samriddhi Mishra, is asking, why now? What is the proximate cause behind justifying this legislative intervention? Uh, so, if you would like to take that, Koil.
You know, honestly, that's a fantastic question. I only honestly also wanted to add to what Shivani ma'am was saying, that it's not just Article 14 and 15, but also 21, the right to dignity, the right to free expression and free living. That has also been impacted strongly and greatly because of this new bill that has been passed, and the reason behind this looks like international pressure. If I have to, even if it looks like speculation, but we are looking at the pattern in which the Trump government is closely using is passing a very anti-trans narrative, and that is being reinstated in our own democracy, which continues to call itself a democracy. But we see how how bills like this are passed by voice votes. Yesterday almost 18 or 28 MPs, they had to just walk out because it was just a voice vote that was happening. If you look at the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha proceedings, the conversations that were happening about people, about trans individuals, many of the MPs spoke against it. It was TMC. It was many other political parties who were directly saying that no, this act is unconstitutional. But when the final verdict was done, it was only through an yes and no, and that through voice vote. So it was very clear that they were hell bent on passing the law. They had already decided up their mind, and all of this is just a farce. The community feels it is a farce. The community feels that it was already pre-decided what they wanted to do. This was just a protocol that they had to maintain, which they did, but there was absolutely no no kind of accountability that was taken while this was happening. So we are as a community, we feel very distraught, we feel very afraid, And we also do not have any legal clarity as to what is the repercussion of it. What we can read, what we can understand of the act, it means strong criminalization. It means the definition has changed. It means trans erasure. It means there are possible. They are saying stay at a natal family, even if it is violent, even if it is causing you harm. You have to stay there. You can't choose to move. So all of these are against the constitution of this country. All of these are premeditated ways of curtailing the autonomy that we have over our bodies, over our lives, over our reality. So it's extremely we are extremely fearful. If you also see, the FCRA amendment act has also been passed, so they're also trying to silence and erase the voices of civil society organizations. It is happening simultaneously. So while your FCRA amendments are being passed, the trans bill has come. All of this has some correlation with each other, is what I wanted to say. Ushri?
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
I think we are having a lot of tech issues today. Uh, Thank you for your patience and waiting for me to join. Uh, Going back to what Koil you were saying, uh, I would like to bring us to the end of this conversation with this understanding that even after everything that is happening, hope is a act of resistance, and therefore I would like to uh, throw this question to both of you about what needs to change, what shift needs to come in, what does inclusion and affirmation look like, and what are the things that allies can do, what are the things that community members can do, and on that we would like to bring us our conversation to a conclusion.
With Shivani ma'am's permission, I'd like to go first because my network is constantly not working very well. So I'll just go first. I think one thing that one needs to right now do is withdraw and reject the bill. And what one can do is there is ways of sending mails to MPs and MLAs. When there is a petition that is going to be done in the Supreme Court, and we hope we are going to do it very, very fast. All kinds of legal help. We would need the lawyers on our side, because it is the lawyers who can find loopholes in this draconian bill. So we would require a lot of free pro bono services from lawyers side, who would come across and say that, okay, we can give you some clarity on this. Okay, these are the things you should do or should not do. Okay, these are the things that are still doable. The second thing is, at workspaces, one has to be extremely careful, specifically with trans people, because we are vulnerable. We are extremely vulnerable. Our identities are being erased. There is a sense of all pervading loss. So a little bit of sympathy, a little bit of, there is going to be mental health breakdowns. So a little bit of sympathy, a little bit of support can go a long way. Not to discriminate, not to further harass a trans person on the basis of this bill, to be extra careful, and also wherever you can, in the media, in social media, write about this bill, write that this bill needs to be rejected, that this bill is unconstitutional. All of us have a voice, and through social media we can put across that this is not a trans community problem, this is a human rights violation, and this violation must be stopped. I think if the allies can come forward, now is the time for you to stand up. Now is your time to work, because today it is us, tomorrow it is going to be you. Someday this violation is going to continue. The violation on the autonomy and the dignity of trans person is at stake. It is our duty, our responsibility as allies, to come forward and do your bit. That's all that I wanted to say. I'm sorry I spoke so fast, because I don't know if when my voice will again be erased through technical difficulties.
Thank you, Koil, for bringing in that perspective. I would also want to take one last question that I can see. and this I would like to pose to both of you. What can workplaces do, not just to, not cause more harm, but if we were to continue that act of resistance and hope, what can workspaces do to affirm queer and trans employees right now while we are going through this critical juncture?
What I believe is, like, at this point of time, nobody should take any decision, because it is at a very nasal stage. The bill has just passed, like, and the act, it has become an act, and there is a lot of resistance towards it till we get a clarity. And what, as it is, like, till we get a clarity on how this bill will be implemented, it is like to maintain sensitivity, and, like, to maintain privacy and dignity, and to respect bodily autonomy is something which needs to be done. It's not only that the law is draconian, it's the people, like, how you, like, treat, or how you, look into the bill will act will also matter. And sensitivity is something which needs to be maintained, and also recognizing bodily autonomy should be the criteria as per article 21. It's not only privacy, it's but also bodily autonomy should be respected, whether it is at workplace or any other place.
Thank you for bringing in that perspective, Professor Datta. Respecting a person's agency and bodily autonomy at the workplace, at social and public spaces, and even in the legal standpoint, is why we have joined together today, right? Because there's this understanding that this bill might deeply violate that bodily autonomy, and there is a lot of concern in the trans community. And uh, I would like to first of all thank. I understand that Koel has technical issues going on, but I want to thank both of you for bringing your insights, your expertise, your understanding into this very vital and crucial conversation. And I also want to tell allies who have joined in to sort of keep educating yourself, to keep sharpening your awareness, because as Koel was saying, it's very important to understand this is a, if somebody's fundamental rights are being violated, this is a human rights violation. And for allies to stand up and create those spaces of solidarity, we at Equilibrio Advisory, we bring in the understanding of creating equitable and inclusive and safe workspaces. So we stand with the trans community at this very crucial and unfortunate juncture, and we are also offering our support to the community and also to allies who want to create better and equitable and sustainable workplaces. Our vertical inclusion at work can help organizations to create a more equitable and inclusive and queer affirmative policies. And we at our vertical at mental health at work is also recognizing the psychosocial impact, the mental health impact that both Professor Shivani, you and Koel were sort of highlighting. We are creating group spaces, peer support spaces for the trans community to join in. I would request my team to put the information in the chat for everybody to access. You can contact us. You can. We are offering these spaces of psychological safety and to process whatever that is coming up for the community and allies who are supporting the community. This is, I would like to conclude with saying, this is clearly not the end. As long as allies come together, as long as people come together in support, in hope, we continue to have these conversations and the tide will turn. We stand in support with the community. And with that, we thank all of you for joining this conversation. I again thank all of our speakers for bringing your wonderful insights and incisive perspectives into this conversation. It was deeply enriched because of that. And thank you and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.